Okay, thank you. Can you hear me all right? Yes. We're okay? Okay, good. Just the 1 hour, right? Okay. So again, as it says, advice from the garage, masculinity reexamined. And as I was perusing for images, obviously this one popped up and I'm like, I just absolutely have to use this one. But thanks again for inviting me here to ruminate further on a topic of really great interest to me. Up front, let me say though that the subtitle of the talk is Masculinity Reexamined, just reexamined. I'm not going to claim that I'll resolve this issue tonight or even define the term adequately enough for you. As Judith mentioned, I spent 14 weeks last semester teaching this course, so what I've done is boiled 14 weeks into 1 hour. So again, we'll get as many answers as we can. Some of the students in that class, however, are here tonight, and so they'll be quite helpful, won't they? Notice how quiet it suddenly got. Alrighty, well again, hopefully we'll create a dialogue that will continue well beyond this room for years to come to keep this conversation alive and changing ever for the better. The study of masculinity has really only been around for the past couple of decades, believe it or not. But also too, if we think about it, gender and women's studies has only been around for about 40 years as disciplines within academia. And so, excuse me, many scholars have started writing about it, but again, not necessarily to define it, rather to determine better how to talk about it so that we might someday come to a better understanding as to what masculinities, plural, are. For example, Michael Kimmel, a famous sociologist on masculinity, recently came out with the third edition of his book, Manhood in America, 2012, but it was first published in 1998. And the book blurb claims, and this is a really good way to start the talk, for more than 3 decades, the women's movement and its scholars have exhaustively studied women's complex history, roles, and struggles. In Manhood in America, author Michael Kimmel argues that it is time for men to rediscover their own evolution. Drawing on a myriad of sources, he demonstrates that American men have been eternally frustrated by their efforts to keep up with constantly changing standards. Kimmel contends that men must follow the lead of the women's movement, which, by the way, includes men and women. It is only by mining their past for its best qualities and worst excesses that men will free themselves from the constraints of the masculine ideal. Not to free them from masculinity, but again from the constraints of the masculine ideal. And again, we'll pick that apart as we talk further. And again, if I ever go awry, I'm sure any of my students will be like, hey, we didn't talk about that. So, I'm not to that part of the lecture yet. By the way, you're prominently featured later. Hi, Luke. So again, it's those constraints that we're going to work on. Why is it that men feel the need to be masculine and that only they can be masculine? But what does that mean? And does it only apply again to members of the male persuasion? Well, as I hope to show, it was written with this particular men must be in charge ideal, and history in part went looking for it. But that history left out a lot of men and women who were in fact masculine. But it is those constraints of the masculine ideal, what Kimmel would also refer to as the stereotypical yet dominant form and view of masculinity. So let's reread that history. Not change it, I mean it did happen after all, but read deeper into it to truly see masculinity for what it was, the best and the worst, but also can now become. Judith Halberstam wrote a book on female masculinity, and there'll be much more on that a little bit later, but she wrote, what is masculinity? If masculinity is not the social and cultural and indeed political expression of maleness, then what is it? I do not claim to have any definitive answer to this question, but I do have a few proposals about why masculinity must not and cannot and should not reduce down to the male body and its effects. So in re-examining this topic, we must first take it apart, look at its historical moments, its internal workings, its external appearances, and finally, instead of putting it back together as it was, or as it appeared it was, keep putting the pieces of this puzzle together in different ways to come to a picture that we like. Sort of like an Escher puzzle. Right? Where the pieces can go into each other's spots, and yet we still have a very much same or similar image. You know, pieces in different places, different colors, in fact a different image in the same puzzle. Or as the top image shows, An evolution of images moving and melting into and out of one another, yet with similar purposes, along their own paths. Again, as we mentioned, I taught this course last semester, and it really did provide a very interesting platform for all sorts of these types of discourse and discussions to take place, and several of the student contributions you will also see tonight in this presentation. I was very proud of the work that they put into this brand new course, and into a topic that, you know, again, within gender women studies could be difficult. I saw that fist bump. Students, you know, you got to watch them every minute. So, we're going to look at this somewhat overlooked topic of masculinity. Now, you might be saying overlooked. Well, in a sense, yes. Go back to the quotes I just mentioned. There are many assumptions about the term because we seem to know, I know I hate air quotes too, but we seem to know what the term means. But there's so much more discussion in academia about how to view and define femininity. I mean, look at this Time magazine cover very recently. This is just February 8th, just very recently. And through a toy, okay? But when G.I. Joe underwent a significant change, not as much discussion happened. So the 60s and 70s G.I. Joe, the 12-inch figure, this is what he looked like. I had one of these when I was a child. Then he became this. I mean, the clothes don't even come off like this one. I mean, they're melted onto him. I mean, it's all part of the bulky, muscular. Because for the old G.I. Joe, when the clothes came off, nobody complained about that body shape, or shapes, or sorry about all the nudity. There are now men in masculinities institutes. There are men's rights groups which claim that the softening of America through feminism has undercut masculinity. There's female masculinity, gay masculinity, metrosexuality, retrosexuality, effeminate men, masculine women, the list goes on. So these are just some of the discussions we'll engage in this evening. Again, I'm just here to kind of get us to start thinking about this topic that we tend often not to put conscious thought into, again, because of the assumptions. I took my talk from the title of this book, Advice from the Attic, Perilous Pearls of Wisdom on Beauty, Charm, and Etiquette by Monica Dale. And I just want to read a few examples. And these are real 19th, early 20th century etiquette books for women and how they should behave. There are some persons who spray when they talk. This is very annoying to their associates. Friends speak about the necessity for carrying an umbrella when around Mary. Mary knows that she has this affliction, but it has never occurred to her to cure herself. To obviate this difficulty, all Mary would have to do would be to talk more slowly and be very careful when saying words that begin with the letters B and P, and perhaps with A, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and possibly Z. With those exceptions, she could speak with ease and give no thought to the showers. Or, for a woman to persist in wearing her hair short unless there is some special necessity for it shows a perverted taste. Woman detracts from her charm just insofar as she tries to look like a man. Right? So again, we're looking at these comparisons, this dichotomy. But now, you know, women wear pants today. Is this an automatic default to masculinity? If a man wears a dress, he is a cross-dresser, crossing gender and sex boundaries. But if a woman wears pants, well, she's a woman wearing pants. She's stylish. He's weird. But wait, this isn't always the case. Ancient Roman men and women wore togas, which were dress-like. Joan of Arc was prosecuted and executed for wearing pants. This is what she was, again, condemned for. Unheard of in the 19th century for the most part for women to wear pants, but now is standard. But again, isn't it just a pair of pants? See how we can sometimes get so focused on defining and mapping out how gender must be that we sometimes lose sight of the change. Pants are comfy, better suited for certain situations, jeans more than slacks. But on occasion we still hear the expressions of someone saying to another man, put on your man pants. Who wears the pants in the family? Right? We're still gendering pants. Again, we tend to associate these etiquette books with women but not with men. There's that unspoken assumption about how men should act, right? If anything, fathers will teach sons, but it's an understood way. But women would need a book. But also, why the attic? What do we store in attics? Old things we keep out of sentimentality, nostalgia, things often associated with the histories of our families. And I'll admit, when I have a question, I do first go to my mother and ask her about the history. Whereas the garage seems to also hold such things, but maybe more current things, maybe a little less organized, as stereotypically, again, maybe like a man's gym bag, or stereotypically, as sometimes I've been accused, of my mind. I'm being a bit facetious here, okay? But how did two seemingly common rooms of a house become so gendered? The attic towards women and femininity, the garage to men and masculinity. But for the most part, notice the terms I've been using: man, woman, male, female. These are more biological terms. Masculine, feminine are gendered terms, and as scholars have come to discuss, gender is much more fluid. For as many people that are in this room, I truly believe are as many genders in this room. If we open up that discussion again, that multiplicity will grow. But again, masculinity tends to be overlooked because, as I said, it's an assumed afterthought. That we know that these ideas about masculinity in men are hardwired. This brings me to my first clip I want to show you. And this is from Bill Engvall. He's a comedian with the Blue Collar Comedy Tour. And he constantly talks about the differences between men and women. And in part, he talks about them in this idea of being hardwired. And hopefully this is still where I had it. Apparently not. Oh, maybe. Nope. Don't worry, this won't take long to find But again, listen to what he's talking about. And this, again, this idea of hardwired, right? That biological ideal versus the gendered, which is kind of this socially constructed ideal that we'll be looking into. Am I about to hit a button or something? Or no, okay. Just checking. You'd all like the widescreen, right? I'm nothing if not accommodating.
Please welcome Mr. Bill Engvall! I think the biggest difference between men and women is this. Men are basic, just basic. There's not a whole lot of frills. That's why, ladies, when you ask a fella a question, a lot of times the answer you get is, oh. Basic. Women are details. Details, details, details. Yeah.
You're hearing garage and attic?
If you don't got the details, do not talk to a woman. I'll give you a great example. My friend Joey and I were working out at the gym the other day. Joey says to me, hey man, I'm getting a divorce. And I said, oh, that sucks. Can you spot me? That was our whole conversation. I understood it, he understood it. So I go home and I tell my wife, I go, hey, Joey's getting a divorce. Oh my God, what happened? Oh. She said, what do you mean? Was he cheating on her? Was she cheating on him? I said, again, baby, I don't know. I'm not holding anything back here. You got a better chance of getting the answer out of the dog. And that's when it hit me. That's why dogs don't talk. They've learned. She said, Bill, how can somebody tell you they're getting a divorce and you don't ask any questions? And I said, baby, because he didn't ask me a question. All right? What he said was a statement. He said, I'm getting a divorce, which said to me, I have the situation in hand and require no further input on your part. Now, had Joey said, what do you think about me getting a divorce? Then I would have said, well, you're going to be dating again. You need to work on your abs.
So again, right, you can see how he's kind of, building on this stereotypical construct of men and women and the differences. And and building off of Bill and his, jokes, he's talking about this idea of men being hardwired kind of as these almost insensitive jerks. But, how then would he rework that to understand masculinity that actually would benefit them, that they would just become sensitive jerks? Part of his jokes, trust me. There are hardwired things, right? Anatomy items, Adam's apples are usually more prominent in men. Facial hair for men grows quite quickly and must be maintained. Or is that groomed? Which one is the more masculine term? But is it masculine to have one or not? In ancient Greece, yes. In ancient Rome, no. In the Middle Ages, it depended. If you lived during the Carolingian era, 750 to 950, mustache only. The kings before them said beards, absolutely, and beards down to your feet. Different versions. So as you can see, again, his perception is based in part on how women see men as well for masculinity. It's not just men. Masculinity also can be seen to have this component of being constructed by women and how they see men. And while I won't get into it here tonight, as we saw in the class, there's also all sorts of other discussions based on class, race, sexual orientation. Again, different components, but I'm going to kind of keep it more to the binary for tonight. So how do we all see each other, and specifically tonight in terms of masculinity? Have we made any progress in the recent decades with respect to opening up masculinity? Or have we regressed as opposed to progressed? Or have we just plain gressed? Gressed comes from the Latin word gredior, which means to take steps, but that could mean forward, it could mean backward, it could mean sideways. Okay? It just means to take steps. So, let's look at a few instances of history and how masculinity was understood to help focus our attention, and then to bring us up to today. And again, in a way to try to understand how we seem to have come to a sense of prescriptive behavior, as in the sense of masculine behavior must be performed this way, versus descriptive behavior, which means masculinity has been performed and actually done this way. Okay? And in a multiplicity of fashions. There's a quote from Star Trek Voyager that I really love. And again, it applies to all the genders in this room. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations. For when we dig into the history, we find that the stereotypes can be found there, but so are the exceptions that truly just might be more the norm. So, we're going to move to ancient Greece. Are you ready? Buckle up. I don't see you putting on your, seatbelts. What it meant to be a man, and again, notice the term I'm using here, was a male who stood up for his polis, a city-state, voted, fought for it, produced heirs, and loved other men, because only men were capable of real love. Emotionally, spiritually, sexually. And that women were incapable of love of that magnitude. Women could love their husbands, but it wasn't a pure love, like that of man for man. That would be as close to masculinity as we might come to define for ancient Greece, because again, they're not as focused on sexuality as we are today. It was also on display in their art. As you can see here, men were depicted nude. Women were not. Women were usually depicted clothed. Okay? And the ideal here is what you're seeing in this perfectly sculpted body is that you're also seeing a perfectly sculpted mind. They went hand in hand for ancient Greek men and masculinity. And it's just very fortunate that this statue is also pointing at his head. I did look. And so again, within here, right, we have a man and a woman. She is clothed. He is not. And again, that was the standard understanding for masculinity and femininity. So, we also see it in a sculpture called the Tyrannicides. These were two men, a teacher and a student, who were also lovers. And a tyrant wanted to steal the student away. And together, the two of them were so in love, they fought side by side to the death for one another because of their intense love for one another. But it's also a signification of ideal masculinity and democracy. This statue was put up all over Greece representing democracy. That's what people saw when they saw this statue. Of course, in later times, as slightly more prudish attitudes came in, they had to be covered up. Obviously not as much, but they were covered up. But they were also found on ancient Greek coins. You can see them here in the corner. So it's a very powerful masculine image for ancient Greece. For those of you who have seen the movie 300, Came out several years ago. Xerxes, the Persian king, 9 feet tall, all covered in bling. Well, it seems like he's a rather extravagant form of masculinity. But to the Greeks, he was a barbaric masculine individual, right? That he was not being represented because he's partially clothed. He shouldn't be. But who is his naval warship commander of over 1,000 ships in their battles with the Greeks? Anybody know? There'll be a quiz later, so I'm just, prepping you. Artemisia, a woman. Masculine, feminine, strong leader. Leader is a genderless term, except we still tend to view leadership as masculine. Halberstam in Female Masculinity raised this issue. She wrote, masculinity in this society inevitably conjures up notions of power and legitimacy and privilege. So from Artemisia's perspective, is she masculine? I'll leave that for you. And part of that quote with the word power in it, it's also the reason I wore this tie tonight, which has an outlet and a plug. And on the cord of the plug, it says the answer is more power. Right? And of course, right, there's the gendered constructions for the cord and the outlet. For medieval Europe, and again, this is my point of study, so I'm going to talk about medieval Europe a lot tonight, so either you're welcome or tough. We'll work with either. The Bible was the focus as the church had control over much of the political and intellectual landscape as well as religious. Eve was created from Adam, thus man was to be obeyed. With their expulsion, we see that their punishments are also gendered. Farming for Adam, childbirth for Eve. However, the first time we encounter the creation story in the Bible, it merely says God created them male and female, Genesis 1:27. Sounds rather equal. The pronouns tend to bend toward he created them in his image for God. But the later, more descriptive portion where this is, where Eve is created from the rib comes in Genesis 2. Rabbi Telushkin wrote a book called Biblical Literacy, the most important people, events, and ideas of the Hebrew Bible. And with the creation of Eve last, Telushkin asks a very interesting question. Is such an explanation of women's creation demeaning to women? On the one hand, the claim that man was created first and formed out of a part of him might suggest the male's inherent superiority, which is how medieval male theologians were interpreting that and utilizing that for the masculine over feminine, male over female ideals. On the other hand, the fact that every new creature, and this is Telushkin, every new creature depicted in the divine creation is more highly developed than the one that preceded it might indicate that woman who is last to be created represents the apex of creation. Therefore, more masculine? Or is it that feminine then takes that place, right? In any event, Telushkin finishes, the account in chapter 1, which states that both sexes are created in God's image, clearly suggests that they are equal in God's eyes. I'm also currently reading, as Judith mentioned earlier, I'm reading a biography of the Queen Mother right now, the mother of the current Queen Elizabeth II. The Queen Mother died in 2002. At one point in her letter, she's writing a letter during World War II, and she says, quote, the war has disrupted social norms. More and more women went to work. So even she is seeing a form of masculinity that is in her writings, as her writings seem to indicate, is subverted by this disruption of social norms with women working in men's jobs. Sort of how we were discussing briefly, the Engvall clip and how he's thinking about this hard wiring. But we could almost say that World War II did help us to disrupt the discourse on masculinity and show how leadership, privilege, and legitimacy, Halberstam's terms, were a realm for men and women, right? We've seen this image. It's a very prominent image. We still see it today in its many manifestations, Luke. The Independent, the school newspaper here, when recruiting for new staff, for new students to work there, created a poster. And again, later, the star of the poster is sitting right back there. He'll be happy to sign copies for you later. Luke was in my class, and again, I hope you don't mind, Luke, but this is it's a marvelous example. But when you presented on the poster in class, right, you said that you hadn't quite realized the masculinity discourse of this. You just thought you were taking a picture of you as Rosie the Riveter, right? That there wasn't anything connected with masculinity or femininity. But the course then brought up all of these conversations, right, of a man performing Rosie. But he said no one had said anything about it to him before when they were putting this all together. It just seemed natural. Judith Butler, another prominent scholar, talks about performativity in gender. Not about acting in a play, performing, but how we do it every day, right? So my tie would seem to be me performing a masculine piece of clothing, right? And I do it because I'm encountering and engaging with students every day as part of that authority figure ideal. Maybe not necessarily the masculine ideal, but certainly authority. So my performance changes. It changed tonight when all of you came in the room and you saw, I was wearing a tie, but you saw that it also was connected to the talk. My masculine performance shifted again. And this is what Judith Butler's talking about. We change and shift daily. So your gender tonight's going to be different tomorrow. Somehow, some way maybe, maybe not. Right? So, because she's largely looking at interactions, right? But it can also happen just on your own. So, but again, it's performing your masculinity, your femininity, your identity. And again, women throughout all history have always been working agrarian to industrial, but how is it that the norm, again, is gendered toward the masculine as such? Why must that external attribute define us? And why, too, can it not be applied across genders? Just as femininity can be for men, but usually when that has happened, it's interesting that it gets renamed. Judith Halberstam wrote a book, Female Masculinity. I haven't really seen a book yet on male femininity. What I have seen is the word metrosexual, right? Metrosexual men are men who are comfortable with their feminine sides, but you can't use the word feminine in the description. You have to use the word metro, which means city, urban life, which is also gendered toward the masculine. Okay? Again, like the gendered construct of the garage. And on one other quick note too, connection with this, the use of eyeliner by men has been termed guy liner. It can't even just be eyeliner. I kid you not. Because over here, as you can see, it says because guys need their own type of makeup. So, but here it's Captain Hook, Jack Sparrow can't swashbuckle without guy liner. And this is part of the metrosexual discussion. Again, I do not want to say that the history by men has caused all of these types of constructions, right? It's multiple levels of society, class, race, orientation. We need to simply look at how we have in fact examined the history to say this is how masculinity developed and how masculinity should be. Back to the Middle Ages for a moment. You knew it was coming. I mean, I love this stuff. The medieval knight in shining armor who rescues the damsel in distress is not even a medieval construct. It was created later to describe the Middle Ages to make sure we understood that they obeyed the masculine constructs of a knight in shining armor rescues a damsel in distress. No. I've been studying the Middle Ages for 30 years. There are knights, there are women, but the damsel, again, that construct is more 18th century. In fact, many of the women in the Middle Ages fought in battles. Many women in the Middle Ages kidnapped men to force them to marry them. And yet the terminology still used to describe them as gendered. King Henry II fought battles with his wife, Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine resisted him in battle. Well, that's what I read a lot of the times in these documents, but no, she fought him. She was an amazing fighter. And from jail, he had put her in prison so he could have an affair with another woman. And she still fought battles and nearly beat him every time. And if you want a really good Hollywood depiction of this, see the movie Lion in Winter with Peter O'Toole and Katharine Hepburn. Amazing film. I adore that film. If you ask any of my students in here, they get tired of me saying that. And probably seeing it because I show it as much as I can. So again, we still do it in language, right? And again, that's why I'm not going to offer a definition of masculinity for you. Just some suggestions for how we can see in our conversations, look to the obvious yet overlooked ways we talk about it. During the NFL playoffs, the Carolina Panthers were known for giving a child in the stands a football after a touchdown. During one playoff game with the first touchdown, they gave a football to a little girl. The next time to a little boy. However, the announcer said that young man will remember that for as long as he lives, just as earlier that little girl will. You see how we're shifting the masculine discourse, okay? But we don't necessarily notice it. Again, the obvious but overlooked. We still create these imbalances in perception. When Cam Newton lost the Super Bowl, any Broncos fans in here, by the way? I just wanted to. Okay, I figured as much. He left his press conference after only a few moments, and he was considered a poor loser and a pouty child, which is a genderless term. He's no longer the masculine quarterback. He is a genderless child, right? But when Ronda Rousey, who lost to Holly Holmes, later admitted to suicidal thoughts, people had sympathy for her. Many sports writers looked at this as being, again, gender biased. Men must man up. She has what some call a masculine body because people identify those muscles with men, with masculinity, yet she's also supposed to remain feminine. But why these strict binaries, external and internal? And look at her arms, right? They're strong, they're built, they're powerful, but does that mean they need to be masculine or feminine? Or simply powerful? Again, but as we discussed with Halberstam, masculinity tends to lead to the idea of power. Think about it, right? And this is going to be very personal, I hope you don't mind. Here's my arm. Check that thing out, right? I would probably not call this masculine. I mostly would call it not in attendance either, but I wouldn't call it masculine. But I'm also not going to call it feminine, right? Because we tend to take feminine to mean non-masculine, okay? Rather instead, right, can't we just look at it and say, hey, that's a pretty sexy or cartoonish arm, whichever you prefer, right? Masculine, feminine, sexy, cartoon. Gay men are often considered effeminate, therefore not masculine. Isara Tuaolo of the NFL would disagree with you. This is him with his husband and his children. I'm not telling him he's effeminate. Female masculinity. Female by definition does not mean masculine. Again, Judith Halberstam's book would disagree. As I've already discussed, her book brought to the fore these discussions and truly opened up how we talk about masculinity in light of biological sex, power, legitimacy, as well as history. And over there on the left, you can see the cover of her book. And then I just found the Tina Fey cover just recently with the man arms. So she's kind of crossing boundaries here, isn't she? At the Screen Actors Guild Awards, everyone, male and female, are called actors. The opening of the show. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I got into the business by doing this. I'm an actor and proud of it. Male or female, they say I am an actor, not actress or actor. But the categories are still best female actor in a, fill in the blank, male actor. By sexing the categories then, again, we're recreating the masculine-feminine dichotomy. But gender, along with race, are still factors in the industry that we're going to be dealing with. Again, the Oscars are on Sunday, and again, race is a big component of that show. And just to complicate matters just a little further. Wouldn't be any fun if I didn't do that. 1982, the movie The Year of Living Dangerously, Linda Hunt plays the male photographer Billy Kwan, a role for which Hunt won the 1983 Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. Eddie Redmayne has been nominated for this year's Oscars for a transgendered woman in The Danish Girl in the Best Male Actor category. Fluidity. To say that there's only one way to define masculinity, I don't think so. So again, hopefully you can see that we really do need to re-examine and re-examine. And if I haven't mentioned it, re-examine. Men are strong, so are women. Is strength then just a masculine construct, or is it a human construct? There are masculine attributes that we tend to identify, but must they be confined by the male sex, as Judith Halberstam asked. And as I've been thinking about this talk for quite a while, when Judith first asked me to do this, every night I would go to bed, turn off the lights, pull up the covers. 2 minutes later, I would jump out of bed because I had another idea to write about for this talk. It just consumed me, right? Even after a semester of this class, the ideas just continue to erupt. And so finding a definition was getting harder and harder. I think it's a good thing. Does it mean we cannot come to some understanding? No. But we do need to at first break those old stereotypes and begin to see each other for who and what we are as we perform our gender, and see ourselves as masculine, feminine, human. We can certainly come to some commonalities, but does that mean it has to be total agreement? Differences are good, but it is in how we express those differences that can make, pardon the expression, a difference. I know, a Ph.D., and I use the same word 3 times. My students get in trouble for that. I'm surprised not one of them spoke up. Their heads are doing this, though. There are 2 main quotes, though, that I kept coming to. Frank Burns from MASH. And I know that Frank intends, right, for us all to act the same, but over the years, I've come to read this a little bit differently. And I have 2 clips for you to emphasize my point. They both come from Android phone commercials. I am not a spokesman for them. I'm not trying to sell you their products. It's just that their commercials worked really, really well. So the first one is a clip where there are 2 pianos. One that's monotone, and one that is not. Obviously, the monotone one, I believe, is Frank's piano. The multi one is the one I would recommend. Hopefully this will work. Again, right, as you saw, 88 keys. For Frank, they're all individual keys, but let's all do it together in the exact same manner. Whereas we can all be similar looking keys, but we can all sound different notes. All these different genders with different notes, right? But still, we can play, right, different tunes, right, every day. Or we can come back to the same tune, right? But we're still all being our own. So the next clip then too, I think, is helpful, and this is just a minute long, so.
Remember back in school when you either invited the new kid over to your table or you didn't? If you did, that was a cool move. That was an and move. And moves take guts, but they can mean everything. Their and move was to put wings on a bicycle. Now, we fly. When enough people have an and view, the world changes. Forever. If you think about it, you're only here because of an and moment. Opening yourself up isn't easy, but when you do, it's hard to forget, because it leads to something new, something better. That's why we need this, and them, and you. Yeah, you, watching this right now, because everyone doing the same thing won't move us forward, but everyone doing their own thing, together, can.
Be together, not the same. However, lately, more and more, though, we are seeing some backlash to what would be called a renewed masculinity. Others are calling it a reversion to femininity, that men have lost their masculinity. Some men's rights groups claim that feminism have reduced men to shameful shells of themselves. They go out into woods to have drumming ceremonies, go shirtless, to shout, to grunt, to reclaim that masculinity. So again, remember when I asked at the beginning as to how we have regressed. Is it regressing? Is it a reexamination? Or a reapplying of old stereotypes that can, in fact, sometimes be harmful? And that the last clip that I'll show you will bring that into more perspective. But why this fear about losing masculinity? We hardly have ever discussed it before, but now to reclaim it without truly reexamining it might cause more tension and misunderstanding about it. This seems like a pulling away as opposed to a coming together, right? Some scholars have looked at the economic decline in 2009, where men lost jobs, were no longer the breadwinners, and that aspect of masculinity created some of it. But by re-examining and redefining these self-identified masculine roles can expand, recreate. So again, let's not redefine masculinity around it to reclaim some sort of power in that sense of legitimacy that Halberstam was talking about, but to reclaim another masculinity. And again, a masculinity, not the one and only masculinity, plural, masculinities. I can't stress that enough. But as part of that slight backlash, man can, wine in a can. This again was another student's project. Their motto, whack it back. I like to sip my wine, but it looks like a can of beer, fine. But why does that then need to define masculinity? This could be just, it's practical, right? If you want to take wine on a rafting trip or a tubing trip, right, you put those cans in the water to keep it cold. A bottle might not make it. The cans will make it, a little dented, but they'll make it, all right? But again, instead of saying that's masculinity, why don't we just say it's practicality, okay? And as I kept looking for man can stuff, these two quotes kept coming up. I couldn't get away from them, so I thought, well, then neither will you. So you're welcome. All right? Good man can make you feel sexy and strong and able to take on the world. Oh, sorry, that's wine. Wine does that. And then from Rudyard Kipling, a man can never have too much red wine, too many books, or too much ammunition. The students in my class really did help me with my own concepts of masculinity in the world, but also in myself. For those of you who do not know me, I am a gay man who is masculine, who is feminine. I'm also a cook. I'm also a very, very bad golfer. And I epitomize the following. I'm not kidding. I'm a feminist, a lover of old movies, of art, fine wine, of ties, as we've been discussing all night. I have 879 ties in my collection right now. I know it's a small collection, but it's growing. It'll get there, I promise you. I love football games. I love basketball. March Madness is coming. But even my gay friends have some backlash about my masculinity and how I perform it. They don't understand why I enjoy these manly, read straight, sports, and not more gay things. But being a masculine gay man means being able to enjoy football, basketball. But overall, it appears I enjoy masculine and feminine things, whatever those might be. Masculine can mean power, but let's not automatically default to the idea then that the feminine must mean weak or powerless. It is also power. The two ideas need not be binary opposites. How about instead of contradictory binaries, we have complementary binaries? The times are changing, right? You know, I quoted Kimmel at the beginning of the talk. It is only by mining men's past for its best qualities and worst excesses that men will free themselves from the constraints of the masculine ideal. This next clip, I think, will bring pretty much everything together that I've been trying to offer you tonight. This was also part of a presentation a student did in my class, and I really, again, want to quickly here thank them for all they taught me last semester, and then also gave me the privilege of then speaking with you tonight about this topic. This comes from an organization, who put together a video of what did it mean to be a man in 2015. And the first part of the video clip, they asked some hard questions about these masculinities, again plural, and then again the shifting in the masculinities. And then I promise after this we'll almost be done.
This guy is definitely the guy your mom wants you to marry, and this is the guy you're going to run off to and leave him to be with him. All right.
Nice package.
For women, you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals.
Only Rosie O'Donnell.
No, it wasn't.
In an appearance on Russian television, Tarpashev referred to Serena and Sister Venus as the Williams brothers.
I don't believe that he's raping, and some of them really is unrapeable.
Students a part of the Sigma Nu fraternity were behind these banners. Hope your baby girl is ready for a good time.
I really hope that eventually we never have a place in the NFL for people that strike a woman.
You're a feminist.
Yeah.
And you are a man.
Yeah. All those things, having some traits that are traditionally masculine doesn't exclude me from wanting gender equality.
I don't mean to suggest that this is an issue that only mothers should have to think about. Family leave should be thought of as an option for both parents.
I don't want to take any stereotypical dad roles, like where this is where my position stops and where my wife's position starts.
I'm proud to call you my mother. I'm proud to be your son. You made me the man that I am today.
The most important thing that I could do with my daughter is lead our life with love. Not success, not fame.
Big guys cry. We do. Big guys are sensitive.
What a good man. A man of service who persevered because he believed his efforts would deliver a better life to those who follow. Sometimes I think that's the best thing to hope for when you're eulogized. Just say somebody was a good man.
So ultimately, I'm not saying stay out of the garage. We need the garage for many things. Park a car, fix a bicycle chain. Some people have washer dryers in there. Play music. Think about the many bands that came out of garages, built computers, created animation. I'm trying not to name names because after the whole Android thing, I don't want to get into any more copyright or, sales issues. But sometimes it's just a place to get away and re-examine. So go to the garage or go to the attic, the kitchen, the bedroom, or the room where all the major thinking happens, the bathroom. And continue the conversation, but continue the re-examination of what masculinity is, can, and might be in all of its glorious forms. Thank you.